Hello, my name is Alexia. Thanks so much for joining us for this session. I guess I'm curious, so I might ask a few questions just to get a sense of the room. First, can you raise your hand if you're an entrepreneur? Great. Can you raise your hand if you work with entrepreneurs? Who's a coordinator? Okay, then can you raise your hand if you're affiliated with any sort of like environmental work? Awesome. Okay, really good representation here. Thanks for joining us. Again, my name is Alexia. I'm the CEO and founder of Symbrosia. I flew over this morning from Kona, Hawaii, which is on Hawaii Island on the west side. And at Symbrosia, we are solving one of the largest untackled issues in climate change, which is livestock methane emissions. And so when I'm sure that you've seen in the news lately that beef and dairy products and farmers in particular are getting a lot of pushback from consumers because of the environmental footprint of those products. And as a result, we've seen an uprise in plant-based and alternative meat options. But what we're doing at Symbrosia is working on cutting the methane emissions from the livestock, which is the largest source of greenhouse gases from this supply chain. And so when livestock, beef, dairy, and small livestock like goats and sheep consume their food, they ferment it to break it down and produce a gas called methane as a byproduct of that process. Methane is 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And when I say that, I mean it's 30 times better at warming the atmosphere and creating climate change as we see it. And so tackling this source of emissions is also a real opportunity because it doesn't exist in the atmosphere for as long as climate change. So tackling methane could result in a faster cooling process or kind of less long-term effect on the environment, which is really what we need to see. Okay, but how do we reduce this source of emissions? We grow a seaweed. It's a native species to Hawaii and much of the Pacific called Asparagopsis taxiformis as a feed additive for cattle. So when cattle consume about half a percent of their feed as the seaweed, their methane emissions are reduced by over 80%. We've seen this now proven out across 12 peer-reviewed studies in 3 continents, and we've conducted our own research here at Hilo as well to confirm those findings. We are focused on supplying the feed additive initially to the Hawaii market. A lot of cattle are produced in Hawaii, but at some point, because feed costs are extremely expensive, they get shipped to to America to be fattened and sent to market. And so what we're working on in the beef and I guess re-emerging dairy industry here following COVID is that when livestock are not emitting methane, that gas, which is natural gas that we use to warm our homes, it's really potent, goes back into their metabolism. And so we're seeing these massive productivity improvements in the animals. We're seeing 15% increase in milk yield in dairy cows while they're consuming the seaweed, and about a 30% increase in the rate of gain in beef cattle. And so what we're working on with local producers here is, can we make it more economically viable to finish the beef and produce beef entirely in Hawaii and keep those animals here for processing and consumption in the island without further creating dependencies on imported livestock products. So that's kind of the scope of our work. We've been doing this research for about 3 years at the Nelha OTEC facility, which is an aquaculture park managed by state resources that kind of operates like a business, but it's a really great place for young companies working in marine or environmental sectors to kind of get started because they have a research park and then scale outside of the research park. I've been asked to comment a little bit about funding in particular. I know that a lot of environmental issues and solutions can require some real financing, especially when you think about infrastructure or going through a long or lengthy research process to develop a new product. We've, over the past 3 years, raised about $9.5 million to support our work through a blending of grant funding, both state, federal, and prize funding, and then also investment funding. There was some comment on this in the earlier session. Investment funding there's a severe gender gap, so about 2.5% of investment funding goes to women-led companies, and about 12% of those in charge of making those decisions within those companies are women. On the flip side of that, women-led companies have about 30%, sorry, I'm out of time, have about 30% higher returns than male-led companies. And so there's a severe gap. It is a really difficult process, and I'm happy to maybe talk about that a little bit later in Q&A. Sorry, 5 minutes goes by quickly.
Introducing one of our changing faces, Wahina Ruth Cross.
Well, while they're getting the slide ready, I'll just teach you some Kiribati, because when we start talks, we start with a blessing, which is the same way we say hello. So I'll say Kamnaderi Maori, and you say Maori. So Kamnaderi Maori. Maori. Thank you. So I want to see a show of hands for who's actually heard of Kiribati before. Okay, yeah, that's actually pretty good, because I think quite often not very many people have heard of Kiribati. So I've included some pictures, and I realized when I was looking at the panel list that I was the only person from low-lying coral atolls, so I figured I offered a unique perspective, so I wanted to focus a little bit on that before going into what we're doing with green business. And so just take a look at those islands, because that is pretty much what our islands look like. So we are, if you take Australia and Hawaii, we are right smack bang in the middle, but we are also Hawaii's closest neighbour, Christmas Island, right? So 3 kilometres of ocean, 1.8 million square kilometres of ocean, so we're one of the largest ocean states in the world, but we're also one of the tiniest countries, because of that, there's only about 500 square miles of land, right? So, pertinent, because what's happening, with climate change, we are frontliners. And so I figured I'd come here with that perspective and offer that before I launch into what we're doing. So, yeah, this is the thickest part of our island. So when we decided to build the airport, they chose the biggest island with the widest part. So that's basically it. So you can see right up there, there's an airstrip. And and so that's the only place where you can land a 737 on our island. Now, with what happens when you're on a tiny coral atoll is that your water lens is very fragile. So I just wanted to point out how saltwater intrusion, coastal erosion, and food insecurity is a way of life for us in Kiribati, right? So I just wanted to show you what the water lens looks like, and so you can get an appreciation for just how fragile it is. I love being here in Hawaii because I can see all these mountains and land, and what a luxury it is, right? Because where I come from, this is it, tiny skinny coral atolls, and you can see there's a very shallow water lens where the fresh water is. So those slight changes in the environment are affecting the sea level, which is affecting our fresh water lens. So a lot of our islands have saltwater intrusion, so our wells are pretty much contaminated. So we have to look at other sources of water. So when I first watched the cartoon Moana, I actually cried, because to me it wasn't a cartoon, it was actually a true story, right? And so, that's those scenes where the crops are failing and you have to go further out to go fishing to get food for your family. It's actually true in Kiribati, because again, those slight changes in the environment have devastating effects in places like Kiribati. So that's when we move into green business and the economy, and I thought, what would be a good depiction of what this looks like for us? And so I'm like, that's us Tafiti, going thank you to everybody who's trying to make a difference with the decisions that you're making, right? So yeah, so you guys, that's Moana, trying to do things and trying to make a difference. And all these things, so I'm listening to Alexia, and I also know that biodiesel is going to come up as well, and these things are really exciting for people like me. When I come to Hawaii and I see and hear about what countries are doing and what businesses are doing that are very environmentally conscious, I take those away and I get really emotional, because I'm one of those people that's like, wow, thank you for what you're doing, because it actually matters, because it shows those are the ones who care, they're the ones who are trying. And so you think it's, what this tiny impact, it actually does mean a lot, right? And so all these, green businesses, energy efficiency, reducing emissions, all right, it might not matter ultimately for countries like us, but it does, because at the end of the day, what's happening now means that we are going to become displaced, right? So we've been given about 40 years before it becomes completely uninhabitable, and we are looking at vertical farms and desalination systems in order to survive, right? So what am I doing, right? Because we're talking about green business and what we're doing in Kiribati, and we have, we're all working towards sustainable development goals, right? So, in Kiribati we have Global Green Growth Institute, which is focusing a lot on cross-cutting solutions, and also entrepreneurs who are able to develop cross-cutting solutions that can work on circular economy. We can't run out of time. But I guess before I sit down, I also wanted to point out that I put the Aloha Challenge up there, which was something that I recently found out about, which was really exciting to me because it showed me what he's actually doing and how it's kind of setting such a great example for other Pacific Islands as well. So if you don't know about the Aloha Challenge, I definitely encourage you to look into it and develop an understanding, because it's really vital and setting a great example for not only the Pacific but other countries around the world. So thank you.
We have for the Kelly Supah opinion, so Kelly needs the. Thank you, Kelly.
Is everybody okay if I just sit down and do the slides from here? I'm the one without the mask up here. And thank you for that presentation. I actually just gave a presentation to a United Nations group in Japan on the Sustainable Development Goals and the Global Health Challenge. So it's getting, the word is getting spread finally. My name is Kelly King. How many of you have heard of biodiesel in the state? I used to ask this question like 25 years ago, maybe one person would raise their hand, so it's really nice to see that everybody's heard of it. Very different from the other type of biofuel, which is ethanol. So my husband and I started Pacific Biodiesel back in 1995. We started making fuel in 96. It was almost a year to the day since we conceived of the idea that we actually started. We got the first plant built, and we started making the fuel in the Central Maui landfill. And now this is where we're at today. We're actually farming sunflowers for biofuels, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we got that funded. Is it just one of these arrows or just a push? Okay, so this is our humble beginnings back in 1995 when we built the first plant in the Central Maui landfill. It looked like that, about 8 or 10 tanks. Our daughter was 10 years old. She's in her mid-30s now. And we were making about 600,000 gallons a year. We went around and tried to figure out how much grease there is in the state of Hawaii, and especially the island, the county of Maui. And not as much as you would think, but we were making it from used cooking oil back then, and all the restaurants that did fried foods, the Japanese restaurants, Kentucky Fried Chicken, the fast food stores, the minute stops and their chicken. And we figured out that the most we could probably get off the island was about 250,000 gallons, but we started bringing it in from the other islands too, because they didn't want to put it in their landfill. So that was our original experiment with the plant, and we started with the same concept we have today, which is community-based biodiesel. And that means we focus on what we can do in the community, for the community, and by the community. And little did we know that today this would become known as the circular economy. So we actually got to this point where, 27 years later, we're making premium biodiesel. It looks like this now. It's clear because it's distilled, so it doesn't have that amber color. We don't have any issues with any kind of contamination, so we get no complaints about the fuel anymore. It's 100% renewable. It's biodegradable at the rate of sugar. It's 86% less emissions than petroleum diesel, and non-toxic. So it's a great fuel for replacement of our existing infrastructure of diesel vehicles, which will probably be around. I mean, diesel vehicles rolling off out of the factories today will probably be around for at least another 30 years. They really last till, when you get to 100,000 miles on a diesel vehicle, you're really just breaking it in. You get to that amount in a gas car, you're trading it in and throwing it away. So here we become the poster child for the circular economy. And basically this is what it looks like, this chart to the left. Right now we're into growing sunflowers, so we've added the part that was a big aspiration for me 15 or 20 years ago was now that we're picking up this used cooking oil, how are we going to get to the point where we're growing the crop where we could actually sell the oil to the restaurants and then get it back and make it into fuel? So that's what we're doing now. It's very exciting. The local restaurants, we're trying to figure out how, if they're going to do farm to table, how are they going to get that piece? Because that cooking oil piece always going to be important. So now we're selling in 5-gallon buckets to local restaurants. We have our macadamia macadamia oil that is in all the Costco's across the state of Hawaii under the Made in Hawaii Naturals. So we're doing the fuel and food, and we also have beauty products that we created out of the macadamia oil, and with the hemp that we're growing on the farm, we're extracting CBD. So it's all these high-value products, which if anybody here farms, you know you can't make it on one product alone. You have to have high-value products. This down here is a picture of what our refinery looks like today on the Big Island. This is on the Hilo side. And we're so proud to have brought this state-of-the-art technology because we actually saved a few people who were engineers and chemists from leaving the island. Okay. I just want to give you some flavor of where we've gotten to now. And I was a delegate to COP26, so I was able to bring this message of community-based, of local action, of collaboration, and multi-level collaboration to COP26 last November, and have been doing presentations kind of after having been heard here about 14 times. I think I spoke. I've been doing follow-up presentations on the same thing. And they asked me to speak a little bit about some of the road bumps and the barriers. And actually infrastructure is kind of a two-way street because the infrastructure is there for biodiesel. We can replace all the diesel petroleum right now with biodiesel. But the barrier is really up here. It's the people who don't want it because people making money off of fuel right now in the petroleum industry. Distribution is an issue. Funding has always been an issue. We've gone through years where we've seen the algae companies come in here and scoop up tons of money from our state and we never have done anything. So the rest of this is like, we have a strong commitment, but compared with the government, it's not there. And I've got one more slide, and I just want to show you where we're at now. We have started to get funding from the federal government. And so this is our first installation of a mobile fueling station at Ma'alaya Harbor. And we're working with Department of Land and Natural Resources to get this in there's another one on the Big Island that just went in. And so they're trying to get it more into the marine industry. I'll stop right there.
And next we have Sarah Smith.
Hi everyone, I'm so honored to be here with these awesome businesses that are making a change. I was traveling last month and in a subway station I saw a mural of a quote and it said, the most dangerous phrase in the English language is, we've always done it this way. And I literally stopped in my tracks because I was like, it was a serendipitous moment of validation and almost encouragement for me. That quote asks us to question why and ultimately how. How can we improve something? How can we look at this problem different? What can happen? And to me, this is the essence of entrepreneurship. And it's that curiosity and that tenacity to ask those questions and follow through. So I'm Sarah Smith, I founded Broccoli. My journey with entrepreneurship started 13 years ago, and honestly, I was heavily pregnant. I was sitting in a pile of wasted wrapping paper after a beautiful shower that my friends had drawn for me, and I was bummed. I was like, it was a time of my life when all my friends and I were getting married or having kids, and there was just bags and bags of wrapping paper. And I live on Maui. Our landfill is right in the middle of the island. I've lived there my whole life, and I've done nothing but watch it grow. We're up to 3 poo-poos now. It's disturbing, and that's one thing with living on an island. You're living very close to your natural resources. You're living very close to your climate problems and your environmental issues. So wrapping paper, it seems so silly. You're talking about fuel and methane. And anyway, my issue with wrapping paper at my family background's in printing. So I had this vision in these piles of wasted wrapping paper. Why can't we just take beautiful patterns and run them on neighborhood newspaper presses? Super low tech, right? We're talking about machinery that exists in almost in every town in America. And the current model for wrapping paper, the status quo, the thing that I was questioning, why are we doing it, is paper printed overseas, distributed all over the globe, only to be ripped up and thrown away. And that drove me crazy. So I have piles of wrapping paper. I'm calling all the recycling centers. Will you take it? I started on Maui. I called the whole state, and then I started looking. And once I had this vision of printing patterns and newsprint so that at the end of a party, your wrapping paper could be as easy to recycle as your newspaper, which is the most recyclable product in America. And so I just had to make it happen. And so fast forward, I had to answer my concerns and my problems with my product, with wrapping paper and gift wrap, to answer those problems for my consumer. So I started printing in Hawaii and realized supply chain wise, I was looking at paper that was sourced in the Pacific Northwest, being shipped to Hawaii, and I'm actually shipping most of it back to the mainland, because that's where the bulk of my sales were at the time, and still are. So I was like, okay, as much as I want to be a Maui-made product, I took in the interest of my supply chain, I took it to the Pacific Northwest, and I started sourcing neighborhood newspaper presses. So from a supply chain issue, I know the paper mill, where our paper is from. I know the highs and lows of that industry with the paper. It's milled, printed, packaged right in Washington State, and that was one way that I really overthought wrapping paper to answer those needs for my client and for myself. I also learned a lot of lessons. First off, if you're driven from a passion perspective for creating your product, it's just not easy. I went into my design my design phase with my product with the idea of designing for less. And I decided, let's just create a product that's just good enough. It wraps a beautiful gift, and it has a journey for the end of life, and which I think is really important for product companies to be thinking about for their consumers, because nothing sucks more than being stuck with a bunch of packaging or stuff that you don't have any way to deal with it, and you just end up throwing it in the trash. So I also learned the lesson that you have to train your customers to see products differently. So that example of the video with the turtle with the straw in his nose, I think nothing really helped us embrace paper straws more than that video. So much of product development has been around creating a product that will last a millennium, and really we just need a product to last for the single use that it needs to be, and we need it to go away, it needs to go back to the earth some way. So you have to train products. Yes, so paper straws get soggy, we can deal with it. And I've had to train people to look at wrapping paper differently. So we print on newspaper press, it comes off as a folded sheet, it doesn't have a roll, it's got creases. So those are some ways as an entrepreneur I've had to re-educate and communicate to my consumer, my audience base, to look at the product different. And I could go on and on, but I'm being told to start this one down. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and if any of you have a spark of innovation or see a different path forward and want to talk about real life business, we're all here.
So we have an amazing diversity right here, so we're going to open it up to questions. Questions for anyone? We have about half an hour, just under half an hour for questions to anyone. Yes.
So thank you all for your inspirational stories. I'm curious how much time of your, let's say 8 hours a day, and I'm sure you guys work more than that, did you have to devote for the fundraising part of it when you first started? And how did you manage that part in the beginning? Anyway.
fundraising for like venture capital or?
Yeah, your startup money, the expansion and things like that, anything with the funding related. How much time did you spend on it? But proportionally, you know, how did you go about getting money for some things that, you know, people didn't know or didn't understand really well, and you mentioned about education, but then at the same time raise money. How much time and effort, what creative ways did you do to raise money?
Sure, I can go. This is a never-ending thing for, you know, whether you're a not-for-profit or even if you've got, you know, social enterprise or entrepreneurship in mind.
Yeah.
So it's never-ending, and so the research that you have to do to look for investors or those who have grants in your space. So depending on what's going on, when I'm writing a grant, that can take hours over days, over weeks, right? And then there's a big cram session before it's, you know, due to make sure that it's perfect. But you know it's just some advice that I could, you know, it's just based on what I know. Depending on what your enterprise is, there's a great website called Funds for NGOs, which talks about all the opportunities and offers that are out there, and when you subscribe to it, it'll let you know what's happening in your region, and you can also pinpoint what particular environmental issue or problem you're solving, and it'll send you alerts for that from all over the world, right? The other one is, you know, in the program we also learn about Hawaii Investment Ready and how this firm actually draws in, you know, investment from, you know, I guess companies or investors that are interested in social impact business, right? So that's also a good, you know, potential resource to explore, because they will also then be able to link you through to opportunities that are interested in the particular problem that you'd like to solve with your business. And then it's hustle.
Yeah, I can agree. When we first started, in that first picture you saw of our humble beginnings, we were looking at somewhere around 360,000 that we needed to get to that structure in the landfill. And the first part was building a partnership with the county back then, our county landfill diversion. And nobody really knew what this was. It was really one of the first in the United States. We're the oldest biodiesel company in America. And our domain name is biodiesel.com, because we've been around the longest. But when we first started this, we went to the county, we went to our landfill diversion manager, and she said she liked the idea. She didn't know what it was, but she basically just pointed to a site at the landfill and said, put it there. So the site was provided to us as a partnership with the county. And then to get the funding to actually build the first plant, we went to mostly people we knew, people who were in the industry. One of our biggest investors was the guy who was running the co-composting operation at the landfill. So there were people who understood how we were going to put this together, understood what it meant, what it was going to save the landfill. We went to people who were working for us in our other business, which was a diesel engine maintenance and sales business. And so we put it together with maybe about 5 people, basically bootstrapping, everybody putting in as much as they could. When we got to the point where you saw the new refinery, which is on the Big Island, we were trying to raise around 12 to 15 million. And so it becomes by the time you get to that point, it becomes a thing where you have to have attorneys involved, and you have to have them put together operation manuals, and you have to go around to different groups of people. And you know, it was a struggle, because when we started raising that money, it was right after the recession had hit. And we were, you know, I think we raised about $5 million, and we decided to go for a $5 million USDA loan guarantee so that we build the rest of it. But, you know, I was scratching my head going, what are we doing wrong? You know, we're making these presentations to different groups that we knew and different groups of people who knew other people. And we just weren't getting it. Well, at the end of the year, we ended up getting, from the Hawaii Venture Capital Association, we ended up getting an award, a state award, because we raised the most money that year. It was just a really bad year to raise money, because the economy had just crashed. So, you know, I guess the message there is don't give up. There's so many other ways you can cobble that money together. And, you know, I went to the state, and I sat down with the state and said, look, you guys said you wanted this. You know, I had breakfast with our energy coordinator, our energy commissioner, and I just wouldn't let him leave breakfast until he agreed to give me $1 million. So he said he would. So, you know, just there are different levels of funding, but that first level, it really has to be, I mean, for us, it had to be people who knew what we were doing, knew the value of it, understood there was a long-term operation. It wasn't, it wasn't like a pet rock, a flash in the pan, you're gonna make $1 million this year, and then everyone's gonna figure out next year that it's not worth anything. So I think putting together that information about your long-range plans is really important. And then finding investors who are patient investors and reinvestors, so they're not going to be asking for that return on investment, where's my $1 million this year, that kind of thing.
Anyone else like to answer that question? Or we have another question?
For Sarah, you talked about educating your customers.
Right.
Is there a change in your communications tips that you can give us? What's your best way to communicate with them? How you educate them to change their mindsets?
Sure, yeah, I think educating them on the reason why your product is important, the
How
problem.
do you do that?
Well, I think it's really important to have facts, so to do research, find studies that you can point to that are valid and true, and but then distill the really dry statistics and what have you into language that is easy to consume. And honestly, we do a lot of our messaging through social media, through emails, blog posts, and so it's sort of like this tiered thing. So you might have a blog post where you go real in depth with something, but then you're gonna piece out really digestible bite-sized information and put it out there. I think repetition is important, and always validating your facts, and but make it accessible and make it fun and visual, flow, illustrated flow visuals are really great. And also, I think education comes with building trust, so I really highly recommend to own your email list. So start and nurture that, because it builds trust, and you can build it almost, it's not a dialogue, but I do get feedback. Every time I send an email, I get responses from people that, and so it's really good to have that back and forth and be accountable, or be responsive, let people know that you're listening, and I think that if you do that, that you build that trust, and that they're actually feel confident in your product and your sources and the information you're giving them. So it's really important to have that
How long
level
has
of
the
trust.
business been as you're building the trust? How long did that take?
Honestly, with wrapping paper, people got really interested in November, and so all of a sudden I'm the most cited person on the internet. Not really, but in the course of my year. So obviously, it becomes a pain point for people in the holidays, and so I do see a lot more of that, and every year it grows on that, and I work really hard because I am just a solo owner. I work really hard at being accountable and being a visual face, a face and a voice, and being responsive, and so it's been slow growth. I don't have,
So do you have a social media company you work with, or is it you, or someone else?
So it's me and one marketing manager, but even still, I have control issues. She does a really good job, but we definitely we work through the messaging, and also there's a spectrum of topics that pertain. There might be people might want to know how to compost our wrapping paper because they're home composters, and in a city that might not be as interesting of a topic as people that want to know how recyclable is it, or the packaging. And honestly, you have to know when it's not. I feel you have to be very transparent. We could never use plastic. That was a hard stop for me. But to package, we had to use PLA, which is a polylactic acid made from plant starch. But it is not perfect from an environmental, standpoint. And so I just try to. I tell people what it is. I tell them the pros. I tell them the cons, and then I listen, because a lot of people, as the zero waste movement has been growing, have been asking me we want to buy unpackaged paper, and I knew from a fulfillment standpoint I couldn't do that. It was just not possible. But there's all these now zero waste and refillery shops starting all over. So I'm working with them to buy the paper. I sell the paper to them unpackaged because that's their niche, and it's been great. And so now when people want to buy unpackaged product, I can at least direct them to the people that are selling it unpackaged.
We have about just under 15 minutes, so anyone want to direct a question? Yes.
Yes, please. I have two questions, but I'll try to keep them short. The first question is for Alexia, and I'm curious for you to tell us more about your product and like the journey of the development of this product, and then also sort of where you see that going in the future and expanding other than here.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So we're growing a species of algae that have not been commercially utilized previously. So our entire process over the past like 2.5 years research process has been developing a seed bank, fleshing out growing methods for the seed, optimizing those growing methods so that it could be a feed input and a scalable input, and also making sure that the total operations of whatever facility we continue to scale is sustainable as well from like an environmental footprint perspective. A lot of our research has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, so those are some of the grants that we've used to help us kind of level up in those different dimensions. We're really interested in seaweed as a sustainable input for other industries as well, and so we're hoping that the model that we created for this specific species could be transferred to other species of interest that might have novel potential as well. There aren't, like you couldn't really buy seed for a seaweed if you wanted to grow it yourself. So maybe that's something that we're thinking about too, is like maybe we're just a seed provider to some capacity, and other seaweed intrigued individuals that wanted to grow this species or other species could just kind of purchase the seed from us. So those are some of the like longer term business models that we're thinking about, but we're definitely production heavy initially.
Cool. What does the seed look like from the seaweed?
So the seaweeds grow vegetatively, which means if you like rip them apart, then they kind of just grow faster. Like if you cut down weeds, they might keep growing. And so you can basically provide just like a small sample
Like
or
a tissue
like
culture.
tissue.
Okay.
Yeah, the seaweed. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And sorry, my second question is for Kelly. I'm just interested about, like you spoke, very poignantly to me and the work that I do about value-added products and having like multiple revenue generators. And I'm curious, I have your like sunflower oil on my shelf. Actually, it's so nice to see your face and that you're the owner of this company. What was like your tipping point with your value-added products, or like what was the sort of, I guess, your journey to figure out what those would be, and then when you knew they would work?
Well, I started talking about doing biofuel crops probably back in the early 2000s. And I got a lot of skepticism, people laughing and saying that'll never happen because land's too expensive and oil's too cheap and you can't grow something just for oil, just for fuel, which I knew back then. So even from the time I started investigating sunflowers, I talked to people in Spain, I talked to people in France, and we did some experimental, we got some, a little bit of funding in 2010, we did some experimental sunflower growing on the Big Island. And I always knew it was going to have to be 2 or 3 products that you had to grow off of any crop, because if you're selling fuel for $3 a gallon, which is basically what you get back then, you can't, that's just not a good proposition for an entire crop. So I knew there had to be some higher value products back then. But it's interesting how it came, after looking at it for 15 years and dealing with all the skepticism and actually working with cohort. I worked with a cohort from Santa Clara University to look at what would be the value-added products, but also what would be the value of doing it locally. And you can save a lot of money because we can grow in Hawaii, 3 crops a year versus on mainland they get 1 crop a year. They have to have 3 times larger silos because they have to silo up their seed for the entire year from 1 crop. They have to have bigger equipment because they have to do all of their planting in 1 season, all of their harvesting in 1 season. So you're talking, for us, we didn't need as much storage because we could keep growing and using it as we're going. So once we got into crushing macadamia nuts for what we thought was going to be oil, and it was really messing up our crushing mill, the one we bought with the federal grant money. because we were crushing the shells and all, and macadamia nut shells are really hard, so we were replacing parts every 3 months. We started looking at, well, what could we do with it if we just got the wasted macadamia nuts from the macadamia nut processors on the ground? Because that's why we started doing it. As soon as we built the crushing mill, it's kind of like if you build it, they will come. We started getting calls from the processors on the Big Island who were processing macadamia nuts saying, can you take all our waste nuts? And we thought, well, that's interesting. Why wouldn't they do something with them? There are just piles of waste macadamia nuts at all these processors. So we started picking it up while we were building the crushing mill and dumping it on our land. And then the rats came and we went, oh, that's why they wanted us to pick those up. So we had to store it up until we finished the crushing mill. So it's a lot of this is like looking at opportunity when things, we're looking at circumstances and opportunity and what can we do with this. When we figured out that it wasn't going to be profitable to crush the nuts in their shells, we started looking at the nuts that they throw away that are already shelled. Because there's only there's like less than 50% of the Big Island macadamia nuts that actually make it to market. The rest are just, they're cold because they have a hole in them or they have a little bite in them or something. So we started getting that in, and when we started researching what the value of macadamia nut oil, it's the second best oil you can put on your skin. After second only to sea buckthorn berry, which is only found in the Himalayas, but then it grows right here. So we started thinking about skin oil. And then, of course, we went from, because the skin oil is so pure, we went from that into cooking oil, because we were starting to get into the farm-to-table movement and realizing that a lot of restaurants were just missing that. That's the one thing that took me here, good supply of cooking oil that's grown locally. So it was kind of a series of trial and error and always looking at other opportunities and other, being really flexible. Saying, okay, if this doesn't work, then maybe this will. Let's try it. So we've done a lot of experimental. We have a lab. We had a lab in Maui early on. Now we have a lab on the Big Island. We actually have a lab at our farm now too on Maui. And so we do a lot of that kind of experimental stuff. We do a lot of research. And the value proposition, I always knew it was going to, a group of 20 years ago, I knew that it was going to take that high value product to make farming work. Because farming is a really difficult thing to do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question.
All right, yes, question.
So this is for Kelly. I was a part of the group that was fighting to veto the solar bill, SB 2510. There was a lot of talk about biofuel companies kind of being behind that controversial bill, and I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
It was basically one biofuel company, basically was the one that was not getting good traction. And so that was my take on it, talking to people I talked to. Our company did not support that bill because we didn't feel like it was part of the circular economy. We also did not support what we feel is going to be, we need to be a mix of different, and the solar's not going to solve the problem by itself, wind is not going to solve the problem. We need all the mix of solar, wind, geothermal, biodiesel. We looked into ethanol, that's just not going to work here. It's just not a good energy balance. So a lot of it is waste. But the things that are working, we felt like if we try to prescribe them, it's at 55%. The bill was going to require 55% of all energy on every island, every county, to be firm energy. And the only real firm renewable energy is biofuel, because you make fuel out of plants, and you store it up, and it's firm power. Put it in your engine, and it'll go. You don't have to wait for the sun to shine or the wind to blow. So that's what that bill was about, but it was very restrictive. The EV companies and the solar companies were feeling like it was going to diminish their importance in the energy mix. So anyway, that was our position. We did not support it. We got calls from lobbyists and the people who were pushing it on legislators, and my husband said, no, we're not supporting that bill.
I had a question for Ruth. I was just really curious if you could talk a little bit more about your work in Fairfax.
Oh, my work in KEKOOLANI. I do a lot of development work, so I have a very unique skill given that I'm half-half. So I speak the local language, but also English. So I work for the KEKOOLANI government in the climate finance division. I also work for the US government on their early constraints analysis to see where they're going to focus their development work. I also work for Triple GI doing their Pacific Green Entrepreneurship Program, which teaches business training and business skills to entrepreneurs that have the sustainable development goals in mind. And I'm also the facilitator for their agribusiness training program, which is climate smart agriculture. Aside from that, ILO and UNDP on their youth entrepreneurship program. I think that's it, but I also think I've forgotten a couple. SPC.com, so they do a lot of work in agriculture as well. So in their policy toolkit, I work with Commonwealth Secretariat on the coastal rapid risk assessments, where they're doing indicators, just trying to come up with a system that they can understand, where the Pacific Islands are at. Yeah, I think that's it. So yes, I'm across a lot of development work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question here?
Hi, my name is Crystal, and I work with a few startups, and one of the things I help them with is market research. And one of my questions is, how did you find your market, or what's the process you took to find your market?
Anyone want to start with that one?
Answer for us back in the late 90s when we started, when we built the first biodiesel plants in the Central Maui landfill. Got a lot of press, media, the television media and newspaper and magazines, and really nationwide even. So a lot of people came to us, and we didn't do a lot of advertising. We built about 13 biodiesel plants across the country, and we thought that's what we were going to be doing, is building biodiesel plants for other people, because we would get approached. Like the first one after the Maui one was the gentleman from Nagano, Japan, who was responsible for getting the Winter Olympics there in 1998. He wanted to have a plant built there so he could run the Winter Olympic vehicles on 20% biodiesel. So we did a contract with him, went over and built that plant, and then we started building plants in places like Pennsylvania, Maryland, Nevada, Texas. But the key to it for us was going to trade shows. So we were a big part of the National Biodiesel Convention every year. And probably for the first 5 years of that, once the National Biodiesel Board was formed, which was after we started, it was a couple of years, so it was towards the end of the last century. It's something weird to say. But we started going to those trade shows, and we would go. We were the only ones building biodiesel plants in the early days, and so we'd get a booth. We keep bringing more people every year, but we ended up. That's kind of how we built our market up, was by going right into the industry trade shows and staying with the industry publications as well. So we were a recurring story in Biodiesel magazine, and so those kinds of target the area where the people who are looking for this kind of thing are going to be visible at or receptive to. That's the most effective thing.
I think for sustainability in particular, we're in a really interesting time, because for the first time, maybe over the past 3 to 5 years, consumers are now willing to pay for a consumer or like a sustainable product, or a product that was made in a better way than in the past. Mostly millennials and Gen Zs, 70% plus are willing to pay more for those products. And that's happened over the course of like us developing our company. And so even though a consumer might be willing to pay for something now, I think a lot of the systems in the supply chains leading up to the consumer are not quite sold on that value prop yet. So I think the most insightful process for our company has been spending time with particularly farmers, because they're a really interesting group, and finding within their operations what's most valuable to them. So one of my favorite things is just going to a ranch for 3 hours and really getting to know the ins and outs of that individual's life and like their day-to-day kind of difficulties, and then trying to incorporate that to our products so we can specifically market to those individuals. But I think it's who is paying for sustainability seems to be a question that is still unanswered, even by the corporations who have now committed to reducing their greenhouse gases by or becoming carbon neutral in the next 10 years. employers, I think it's still unclear to them how they're going to get there and who's going to pay for it. So I think it's really interesting over the next couple of years in particular.
Do we have any other questions? Just under 10 minutes or so? Yes.
To move, as I think you mentioned, about the displacement and in the time frame, like 30, 40 years, that's very soon. So how would you proceed and solve and
Thanks for the question, Francie. It's like any problem, you can't just have one solution to the issue, obviously. And it changes from government to government as well. We had a previous government that was very much focused on migration with dignity and the reality of being displaced and needing to live in other countries. But this current government is focused on its resilience and adaptation and mitigation measures. Not to say that the previous one wasn't, but it's just, you're coming at the same problem from different measures. So, it's all things considered. We're obviously focused on helping them to survive and adapt within the constraints environmentally. But we also have a very huge focus on education and international labour, because the philosophy is we don't want to ever get to a point where we do have to migrate and we're not ready for that. So we are looking at what this looks like for future generations, making sure that they're very educated and that they have the skills and that they're prepared to think about living in other countries, and also how we manage that process so that we don't suffer from brain drain in the process, because in a small country we have very limited people and resources that are able to do certain things. There's only 140,000 of us, and so imagine from those, who are the doctors and the lawyers, and if we start to loosen, it really affects the structure and things that we have going on. And just example, I come back with those skills, and then obviously I'm inundated with projects because I'm one person that can do the kinds of work that they need. So it gives you perspective on that problem. And so it's like when we start to migrate our skilled people, who do we then attract to help us run the country and manage and exist in the meantime while we're slowly starting to lose people. So it's a big problem, but we have 30 years to work on it, and lots of people and ideas and solutions, and this is why I brought it back to this and how warming it is to see the efforts on the other side, because we're all part of this, and how are you solving the challenge and how are we surviving the challenge.
We have about 5 minutes. Anybody else would like to ask a question, or if any of the panelists would like to?
I have a question actually, Alexia. I'm so curious. You mentioned something that basically in reducing the methane in the cows, that they're more productive. Can you what does that mean?
Yeah, so all of the equipment that we use to measure methane output from the cows was developed initially to study their productivity and to improve their viability or genetics and breeding. And so there's this known relationship between energy wasted in the form of methane and the productivity of the animal. So again, when it's not being released in the form of methane, which is mostly carbon and hydrogen, that carbon is recycled back into their metabolism and creates more meat, dairy, or even wool or fur. And so it's an interesting relationship, and also a little bit of a struggle for us from a regulatory perspective, because any modification to the metabolism of an animal is seen as a drug use case, and so we can't market that publicly. I'll discuss it and disclose it because it's kind of part of the viability of the product right now. But on our website, for example, you wouldn't see that, or on our product printed, it wouldn't be marketed as a claim.
Is there any concern with the seaweed that you're growing to be invasive in any way? I mean, I'm sure you've researched that.
Yeah, so it's not invasive here. It's native to Hawaii. It's called KEKOOLANI in Hawaiian, which means the supreme seaweed. It was reserved for the elite, the royalty to consume. It doesn't grow very populous compared to other native species. It's red algae. Unlike green algae, I guess, except on a walk with the gorilla ogo, they haven't evolved to grow really quickly. So this one's actually, the populations are decreasing around the islands here.
How did you land on that? I'm just like,
Yeah, we actually didn't do the initial research, so it started in a university in Australia, and then the bottleneck at that time was that, okay, no one's ever produced this seaweed before, this is awesome, but how would it even scale? And so we work with those professors to basically take it from lab concept to commercial.
and they identified this specific seaweed as well?
Yeah, they profiled probably tens of different species, and this one just performed like way better than any of the others.
In the sense of, I don't know, somehow disrupting the environment in any other way, is there a potential for that? Based on like, producing this seaweed for the specific, use? Is there some way to like, get you guys to potentially disrupt the environment in another way? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits to this being seaweed is that seaweed's a very sustainable crop to grow in general. It can be used for like bioremediation. It grows with salt water, no fresh water. And we use fish waste from a local fish farm as fertilizer as well. So we've tried to create the most circular process where the water that's coming into the facility actually leaves cleaner than it came in. And then I guess when it gets to the farm level, what we're studying now is that a lot of the soil content, like the rich minerals from pasture, end up rinsing out of the pasture, be consumed, and end up in the ocean, actually. And so a lot of the ranchers here are interested to see if when they start putting the seaweed into their fields, if some of that mineral is actually staying in the pasture and improving the soil quality. And so, yeah, we just put in a big grant to study that from a regenerative perspective to see if are the minerals being replenished in the fields and is that affecting the ability of the soil to, I don't know, provide better nutrition or absorb more carbon and kind of be more productive.
So awesome.
Yeah, it feels like there's endless things to study, so.
What university was it in Australia?
Sorry.
This research. Who did the research? What university was that?
James Cook University.
Okay, we have 1 minute. Want to do a last remark or, yes? Yep.
The panel's called "It's Not Easy Being Green." Is it getting easier? What keeps you going? Is there something that happened, fairly recently? It's like, yes.
Love this question.
That's more than a minute.
For us, it was
That's a whole other.
Well, for many of us, we have no choice. We have to think about the circular economy because it's a matter of survival. So for us, it's easy because we have to.
For us, it hasn't been easy for sure, but we persisted because it's so important and because it's local, because it's for our community. I've watched a lot of corporations and companies come into the state of Hawaii and we, take either, equity investment from local people here or grant money from the state of Hawaii and not do anything. I mean, during the big algae bloom, everybody thought algae was going to solve all of our energy problems. There were a lot of big companies, corporations that came in here. We got hundreds of millions of dollars and left, without ever producing a gallon of fuel. So, we watched all that and we just kind of, because we live here, we just keep our head down and keep working and keep trying to prove out the local model because our feeling has always been it matters more, at least as much, but probably more, how you do something as what you do. So, like the issue of biofuels, you can't just say the word biofuels and it's a good thing. How is it being done? When people are going to ask you that, like I said, about the algae, well, how is it being done? Is it the waste plants? How is something being done and how it affects your environment? It's just as important as what you're doing and what the goal is. So, we've had times when we leverage everything we had, including our kids' education. We did end up getting an education after all, but the times when we thought, next week something could go wrong and we'd be back to, my husband renting and, working in an office or something. But it was just so important and we just really believe, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to believe in it. And you have to not, and people, friends of mine, they said, oh, that's really cute what you're doing, but it's not going to last. You hear that from your friends even. And so I spoke at the Farmers Union, or the Farmer Apprentice Mentorship Program a few years ago, because I was telling my friend who runs that program that farmers need to think of themselves as entrepreneurs. Because it's their business, and you have to believe in it. And just the year before, their graduation program, the mayor had come and told people, farming's really hard, I don't know why you wouldn't want to do this. I said, why would you say that to a bunch of people who are just learning how to farm and are entrepreneurs and are trying to get into this business? Because the only way you're going to make it in any business is if you believe in it and you push yourself through the lows. And you push yourself through the times when you can't find money because you believe in it.
Mahalo, we have 3 different islands with 4 amazing different perspectives. So mahalo for coming, and we're gonna now. The garden level 40 on the Wailana